Hello, my name is Paul Jaley. I would like to talk to you about revival, particularly an amazing story of revival on an island off of Cape Cod called Martha's Vineyard. It's very interesting that when revival comes and conversions take place in the hearts of individuals, that people often look at it today because of a terrible pattern of the doctrine of the discovery that had been taking place in Europe and come over here. We have a negative connotation of that. In fact, let me read it to you because you need to get the setting for what will happen, not only in Martha's Vineyard, but in many places of New England, especially in the 17th century. You see, the papal bull of 1452, which was called the Doctrine of Discovery, had said that individuals from Europe should capture, vanquish, and subdue the Saracens, the pagans, and other enemies of Christ, put them into perpetual slavery, take all their possessions and properties, in other words, convert or die. Now that is a domination, totalitarianism. It's a horrible philosophy, and many people lost their lives as a result of it. And many individual people groups were put under subjugation, whether it was by the Jesuits or by other groups that came in. And unfortunately, that domination ideology from Europe was a part of individuals even when they came. However, one has to recognize that is not the way of God. That domination and top-down idea of just taking over another people's land, taking over and making them slaves and forcing them to convert, that's not a true conversion. A true conversion comes by God from within the heart. There's a voluntary submission to it. And therefore, when you look at it, you see, in history, did anybody push back from this dominating event? It was so influential, it was so pervasive. Yes. In fact, one of the key individuals that started to push back on this and say, look, revival should come from the heart, and there should not be this persecution of natives, was Bartolomé de Las Casas. He was a converted Catholic. He lived from 1474 to 1566. Listen to what he said. The church must be reminded that it is the conscience of the state, and it must be the critic of the state. If the church does not recapture its prophetic zeal, it'll become an irrelevant social club without moral or spiritual authority. Now, why did he say that? He said that because he believed the church had become an instrument of domination and tyranny and was no longer preaching the gospel of grace, no longer preaching it in such a way where individuals could voluntarily receive it. Instead, in the name of Christ, they were dominating. Especially, he was a critic of some of the attitudes that Christopher Columbus and his people had taken. Now, Columbus had a heart to do right, but his methodology was often mixed with this European philosophy. And therefore, de Las Casas was saying, listen, we've got to do something different here. Now, in England, which would inspire many of the missionaries, and at least a very solid remnant of them, to come over to New England, which would affect Martha's Vineyard tremendously, was Richard Hakluyt. Richard Hakluyt was an individual who advised Queen Elizabeth. He also recognized how come plantations fail, how come they don't operate properly. He wrote, and he said this, why plantations succeed or fail in 1582. If it had not been led with a preposterous desire of seeking rather gain than God's glory, I assure myself that our labors had taken far better effect. But we forgot that godliness is great riches, and that if we first seek the kingdom of God, so lasting riches do wait upon them that are jealous for the advancement of the kingdom of Christ and the enlargement of his glorious gospel. As it is said, I will honor them that honor me. See, Richard Hakluyt said, listen, you've got to go with the right reason. If you're going to go and you're going to travel as a missionary, or you're going to go into those other parts of the world, you cannot go and just try to dominate people. You can't go to that place and just try to say, we're going to take over the land, we're going to own it, we're going to rename it, we're going to do everything we are and just dominate. And therefore, we have to recognize something. In all the scheme of things, God always uses a remnant. God uses a powerful remnant that's going to be an influence to the majority. And unfortunately, in this case, the majority of individuals that often came out of Europe were having this domination mindset. But there were those who were different. And the remnant began to come. And this were the individuals that came over from England into America. Now, one key remnant were the Mayhews. 5 consecutive generations of Mayhews. And the first, the patriarch, had a little bit of this domination idea He came and he just wanted to rename Martha's Vineyard after only his own relatives and people he knew and whatnot. And the last one, the fifth generation. And I want to show you the story of the contrast of those that truly serve and bring the gospel and those that don't. And we ought to emulate the ones who come in love and come in service. You see, after the father, he brought his son, Thomas, and Thomas began as a young missionary in his 20s. He began to minister in Martha's Vineyard. He desired to reach out and he desired to help all those individuals, the natives that were there. Well, his first convert was Hyakums on Aquina, and Hyakums on Martha's Vineyard. And here, Hyakums had come and had come voluntarily to faith. And Hyakums and Thomas Mayhew taught each other their languages so they could communicate together. They often would congregate around what was known as Pulpit Rock later on, where they would preach sermons to the children and to others. And they began to move in a real powerful way together in true friendship. And a revival began to come. First a few, 5, 6, 7, then about 200. And by 1657, there were over 1,500 converts of natives on Martha's Vineyard. And Thomas Mayhew was going to go on a voyage. And when he was going to go on a voyage back to England, they all gathered together. And Hyakums brought all these converts at a place by the wayside. We call it the Mayhew Monument today because it was erected by the natives in honor of Thomas Mayhew, truly serving them for their good and not for his. And there, that service took place, and Hyakums came, and he burst into tears, and he wanted to remember, and he said, "Look, I want to honor your name." And Thomas Mayhew said, "No, make sure we just honor the name of Jesus Christ." And he began to place a white stone there along by the wayside. And then more natives did the same, and the chiefs of all the various tribes did the same. Till pretty soon, over the next few weeks after he left and went back to England and was never heard from again, presumed dead in some kind of sinking of his ship, they recognized and honored the bringing of the gospel through the proper service to them. But it was not just Thomas. He trained his son, and he trained his son, and they both began to work until we got to experience grandson. And here Experience Mayhew was an individual who would write in 1727 about all the converts of Indians in his area. Christiantown became the capital of Martha's Vineyard, so to speak. It was the place where there was a place set aside where only natives would be able to do this, to be able to bury their dead, to be able to worship. And they had built a little Mayhew chapel there in Martha's Vineyard. And he wrote back to England, Experience Mayhew, and he said, part of the problem we have is we have to make sure that this proud attitude from England does not come here to Martha's Vineyard. He said, I also fear that in part it proceeds too much from pride in many of our English people. It is certain that the English in this land have many singular advantages over their Indian neighbors, but I fear that this may have occasioned some of us to think too highly of our own nation, and at the same time to think and speak too meanly of the Indian. The Experience Mayhew was saying, listen, if you pick up that domination attitude, if you pick up that superiority complex, you're no longer going to serve people. You're going to do it just for yourself. You're going to do it just to be able to take it in that way. So therefore, I want to say to you, we can learn from Martha's Vineyard. What a powerful story of consecutive generations of revival. And I want to conclude with this. Do you realize that if we go all the way through the generations, the last Mayhew, the Mayhew that was that fifth generation, he was preaching at the time of the 1760s and 1770s and 1780s, Zechariah Mayhew. And when Zechariah Mayhew did this, he started to operate by the domination, said he owned the island. But he had trained, in the previous generations had trained the natives so well, they sued him in court based on the Declaration of Independence, and they won. And they got their island back, and they banned him from the island. So the bookends of those generations, let's learn the true lesson. Let's do it the way Thomas did it, and others, when we reach out to people, serve them, for after all, the gospel is for others, for us to share once we've received it, and it never is to be an excuse for domination or control. God bless you.